Midway along the journey of our life, I woke to find myself in a dark wood, for I had wandered off the straight path. Thus opens Dante's grand epic of love. But why did the pilgrim poet have to descend into hell, of all places, before he could climb Mount Purgatory and take his seat in the blossoming bud of the white rose of heaven? The Divine Comedy is a love epic. It is the greatest love epic. It is the most ambitious love epic ever crafted by the hands of a mere mortal. Dante descends into hell to learn to love again by the most extreme examples of misdirected love, and also through his relationship with Virgil. When Dante begins his epic, he states he is having a sort of midlife existential crisis. The poem is about him, but it is more than about just him as Dante. Dante says that midway along our life, he awoke to find himself in a dark wood because he had wandered off the straight and true path. That straight and true path is the path of love, the product of the human heart that we all share, that we all have. It is our life, our heart, and our love that we also find in Dante. It isn't surprising, given this reality, that the first proper circle of hell is the sphere of lust. Lust is the beginning of misdirected love, as we've just covered, as evidenced by the pilgrim's discussion with the wounded lusters, Francesca and Paolo. The two had carried on an illicit affair for over a decade. Francesca, as mentioned in talking to Dante, subtly blames Dante the poet, for she had read some of Dante's love poetry and felt in her heart that the love that Dante spoke of was not the love of God, but the love of mere mortals. It was Dante's romance poetry that had captured the heart of Francesca and filled her heart with erotic intent that ultimately was her own undoing. Dante takes pity on Francesca and faints. In the beginning of all three parts of the Divine Comedy, Dante invokes poetry to guide him. "O muses, O high genius, help me now," he frantically cries at the beginning of the second canto of the Inferno. Before ascending up the slopes of Mount Purgatory, Dante invokes the muses again. "Here let death's poetry arise to life, O muses sacrosanct, whose liege I am, and let Calliope rise up and play." By the time Dante enters into heaven, Dante invokes Apollo. Apollo, being the god of the sun, was also the god of poetry. "O great Apollo, for this final task, make me a vessel worthy to receive your genius and the longed-for laurel crown." Dante invokes the muses and the gods of poetry in his journey because poetry, up through Dante's time, had love at its great theme. The epic poetry of Homer, though surrounded by the maelstrom of war, chiefly concerns itself with love. The love of the troubadours of Provence. They were the great love bards and poets who set the medieval world aflame, and Dante meets one such troubadour on his ascent up Mount Purgatory. But in the Latin mind, no greater love poet stood out than Dante's own guide through hell and purgatory. Virgil was the chief poet of love in the Latin Roman world. His epic is a grand tale of love, which Dante feels insignificant in comparison to, as he exclaims, "I am not Aeneas." He tells this to Virgil before journeying to the underworld. Virgil's additional poetry, like the eclogues, also chiefly concerns itself with the nature of love. "Omnia vincent amor," Virgil famously wrote in the 10th eclogue. "Love conquers all." By invoking the muses of poetry, and in being guided by Virgil, the great poet of love, Dante tips his hand and reveals to the astute reader or listener that the journey into and through hell will require the flowering of love. Hell, after all, and as we've just discussed, is ultimately a loveless place. And Dante's journey is one in which the muses of love must nurture him, and how he must grow in love through his relationship with the great Roman poet. The initial relationship between Dante and Virgil is standoffish and cold. It is mirroring and reminiscent of the hell that Dante is about to journey into. While Virgil has been selected by Beatrice, Virgil treats Dante more as an insolent child than as a son or a peer. Virgil is, at the poem's beginning, more of a reluctant guide, someone who isn't particularly happy that he is tasked with this chore to guide this poet through hell. He regularly accosts Dante for his stupid questions and repeated mistakes, journeying throughout the Inferno. Dante repeatedly faints, much to Virgil's chagrin. Two things are missing in their relationship when they enter into the gates, which infamously read, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." There is a lack of trust between Dante and Virgil. As such, there is a lack of love between the two poets, because you trust those whom you love. Without love, there is no trust. Without trust, there is no love. In fact, the two missing ingredients are also the two missing values and virtues that permeate hell itself. Again, the lack of trust and the lack of love. Moreover, without trust, there can be no love. Therefore, the two must build their trust with one another in order to grow in love so as to escape hell itself. While the two poets come closer through their trials and tribulations, the first major transformation in Dante and Virgil's relationship is when they are at the gates of the city of Dis. The famous mythological Gorgon, Medusa, guards the entry. As she approaches the two, Virgil suddenly shields Dante's eyes. This is ironic for several reasons. First, Virgil had informed Dante not to look at Medusa's eyes after they had crossed the river Styx. Virgil has come to care about Dante, as evidenced by the fact that he informed him not to look into the seductive eyes of the formerly beautiful Gorgon slayed by Perseus. Dante, we mustn't forget, is still alive, while everyone else is technically dead here in hell. If Dante looked into the eyes of Medusa, he would have been killed. He would have been turned to stone. Virgil's reminding Dante not to look into the eyes of the Gorgon was done out of a concern for the pilgrim poet. Second, the fact that Virgil shields Dante's eyes also indicates his lack of trust. Despite informing Dante of the deadly powers of the Gorgon seductress, Virgil still places his arm and hand over Dante's face to prevent him from being turned to stone. Third, perhaps most ironic of all, the fact that Virgil shields Dante's eyes beyond being indicative of his lack of trust in Dante also simultaneously indicates his growing love for the poor pilgriming soul, even though the two still haven't reached that sacred bond of loving trust. Again, because Virgil doesn't trust Dante to listen to him, he shields his eyes on accord of his own power and his own free will. Yet if Virgil didn't love Dante, if Virgil didn't care for Dante, he wouldn't have done this. And so we see in this moment the ironic building up of love as we're about to enter the loveless realms of the city of Dis. But the trust between the two must still be built. The lack of trust between our two protagonist poets is soon remedied. Between cantos 19 and 21, there is a tremendous, grace-filled metamorphosis between the two men. Dante makes the growing love exhibited between the two, between he and Virgil, the central image in a place of horrifying and pitiable images. This is, in my view, intentional on the part of Dante. Because they are in hell, and hell is a loveless place, love needs to grow into a burning fire between Dante and Virgil in order for the two to further proceed down the abyss, in order to exit hell and begin the long and arduous journey up Mount Purgatory. In the 19th canto, as the two are in the third Bolgia of the 8th circle of hell, Dante is tired, he is exhausted on the slopes of the mountain. Yet Dante wishes to have a conversation with one of the damned souls he sees, soon to be revealed as Pope Nicholas III. Tired, Dante appeals to his master, now becoming father figure. "Who is that one, master, that angry wretch, who is writhing more than any of his comrades?" I asked. "The one licked by a redder flame." And he to me, "If you want to be carried down along that lower bank to where he is, you can ask him who he is and why he's there. And my pleasure is what pleases you. You are my lord. You know that from your will I will not swerve. You even know my thoughts." Here is the first great expression of self-giving and sacrificial love in the whole of the Inferno. Moreover, trust between the two is now growing, which allows for the self-giving love that binds the two souls together to proceed in their journey in the loveless realm of hell. Virgil takes Dante in his arms and whisks him down the slopes. Then he took hold of me with both his arms, and when he had me firm against his breast, he climbed back up the path he had come down. He did not tire of the weight clasped tight to him, but brought me to the top of the bridge's arch, the one that joins the fourth bank to the fifth, and here he gently set his burden down, gently, for the ridge, so steep and rugged, would have been hard even for the goats to cross. From there, another valley opened up to me. There is no more fear or distrust in Dante's reaching out and asking for Virgil's help. Furthermore, Virgil is no longer incensed at Dante's questions and pitiable condition. As the intermediary guide, a sort of in persona Christi, in the journey through hell, Virgil is there to help carry Dante when he is exhausted and cannot continue on any longer on his own power. Love, as we begin to see in flesh and blood imagery and activity, truly does conquer even the deepest levels of hell. Despite the progress made in loving each other, wherein Virgil has now become more of a father to Dante than a mere guide, there is a final barrier that the two must overcome. There is a hidden, invisible wall that the two have yet to cross. That hidden barrier is, of course, the barrier of forgiveness, the greatest reality and manifestation that love can manifest. Though the two have learned to love each other in a self-giving and a self-sacrificial way, with Virgil lifting up Dante as his burden, the two have yet to learn the high value and the virtue of forgiveness. Before they can proceed into the final circle of hell, this incredible literary construction on Dante's part must be realized. It must be manifested. The two must learn to forgive each other as the highest expression of their learning to love in order to escape hell itself. In the 30th canto, that final barrier of learning love as forgiveness is overcome. Dante, the typical childish pilgrim as he is at times in the Inferno, begins to dally and waste time, absorbed in a debate between two narcissistic sinners, appropriately near a pond of water. Virgil is angered by Dante's dallying and accosts him. Dante tells us that in hearing Virgil's anger, he was filled with shame. Upon looking at the face of Dante, Virgil also recognizes he has wronged Dante in his outburst of anger. Virgil tells Dante to forget about his outburst and to forgive him. Dante pardons Virgil's outburst in the first and only act of loving forgiveness in the whole of the Inferno. I was listening, Dante says. I was listening, all absorbed in this debate, when the master said to me, "Keep right on looking a little more, and I shall lose my patience." I heard the note of anger in his voice and turned to him. I was so full of shame that it still haunts my memory today. Like one asleep who dreams himself in trouble, and in his dream he wishes he were dreaming, longing for that which is, as if it were not. Just so I found myself unable to speak, longing to beg for pardon, and already begging for pardon, not knowing that I did. Less shame than yours would wash away a fault greater than yours had been, my master said, and so forget about it. Do not be sad. If ever again you should meet up with men engaging in this kind of futile wrangling, remember I am always at your side. To have a taste for talk like this is vulgar. This moment is important because, as mentioned, it is the only instance of forgiveness in the Inferno. Had the two not learned forgiveness, they would have been trapped in hell for all eternity. For lacking forgiveness is what brings us to hell. Without a moment of forgiveness, the journey into hell would have failed. For it is their journey into hell which brings them to the reality of forgiveness, which allows them to continue the journey through hell to purgatory and to eventually heaven. Without forgiveness, Dante and Virgil would have been trapped in the eighth circle of hell. Without forgiveness, without the reconciliatory power of love, which moves the stars, Dante and Virgil would have been lost forever. In Dante's sojourn through hell, the great poet pilgrim learned how to love again. He learned mercy, he learned pity, he learned compassion for sinners. And at the end of his journey into hell, he learns about the power of forgiveness. Hell is a cold and dark and loveless place. The only light, warmth, and love that flickered through the 9 circles was the love that Dante and Virgil learned in the presence of each other, because love requires another. And having learned love, they conquered hell together. Omnia vincent amor. Love truly does conquer all things. Love can even conquer hell itself. And so together they begin their ascent up Mount Purgatory with the beautiful stars as their guide. I saw the lovely things the heavens hold, and we came out to see the stars once more, Dante says. Here let death's poetry arise to life. O muses sacrosanct whose liege I am, and let Calliope rise up and play her sweet accompaniment in the same strain that pierce the wretched magpies with the truth of unforgivable presumptuousness. Thus was Dante's opening prayer as he entered Purgatory and prepared to climb the 7-story mountain of love. Dante's Divine Comedy, as we've been lecturing on here, is more than just a Florentine's fantasy of revenge and a poetic allegory of the Christian faith. In many ways, it is an epic paying homage to the book, interweaving the history of love from the pens of mortals to be concurrent with the drama of salvation revealed in sacred scripture. Dante, wandering in a dark wilderness for having wandered off the straight path, prefigures and foreshadows what the rest of the 100 cantos of the poem will deal with, fleeing from that dark wilderness and returning to the straight and true path. By wandering from the straight and true path, Dante has strayed from love. And by finding himself in a dark wilderness, a dark forest, a blackened environ which blinds him, he had flung himself into hell by his aimless wandering. Sent by Beatrice, Dante's love, Virgil, as we've just covered, rescues him, and the two begin their infamous journey to hell and back. They've escaped hell because they've learned love. And again, Dante has chosen Virgil because Virgil was the great poet of love in the Roman tradition. And now we are going to meet another great Roman poet, that other great Roman poet that we've all forgotten in modernity, but that Dante considered the second greatest love poet, the second greatest epic poet, the second greatest poet in the history of Rome. And that is the poet Statius. There is a poetic genius to Dante's journey through hell and now up Mount Purgatory. Again, love conquers all. It is Virgil's Aeneid, the grand tale of love, where Aeneas embodies the love for family and fatherland through his arduous and painstaking journey to Lavinian shores, that Dante uses to inspire himself. I am no Aeneas, yet he is Aeneas. I am no St. Paul, yet he is St. Paul. I am no Virgil, yet he is Virgil. I am no Statius, and yet he is Statius. Ascending Mount Purgatory is a grueling task for Dante. He is proud and therefore weighed down by his pride. Mount Purgatory has the most human of characteristics for it because it is the most human of all the realms. Where hell saw the rejection of humanness through the corruption of love, in the circles of lust through wrath, and in the formal rejection of truth and love, all the rungs of hell inside the city of Dis, Mount Purgatory is the place where love is ultimately nurtured, directed, and eventually realized at the top of the mountain. Through this realization of love, the opening up of the gates of heaven for all the pilgrims of love to enter commences. St. Thomas Aquinas argued that the soul is potentiality moving to actualization. In that actualization, which is found in agency, free will, the understanding of the good, the true, and the beautiful, which all souls are directed to, realizes itself in the freedom to choose the good, the true, and the beautiful. Of course, what is that force, that reality, which moves the soul to actualization and the choosing of God's goodness and beauty? It is love. Love is called the unitive force, the angelic doctor explained in the Summa Theologia. Love is the force which binds all things together in a unitive harmony. It is important to recognize that while hell was cold and dark, Mount Purgatory is a place where light and warmth are now found. The sun appears where it had no appearance in hell. Moreover, it is equally important to realize that the souls make their progress climbing up Mount Purgatory through the purifying love of the sun. The sun is a symbol of love and wisdom, the light which draws burning hearts after it. St. Paul teaches that God is an all-consuming fire, the all-consuming sun. When the consuming fire of God is visible and beautifies the world of purgatory, the souls, moved by that call and that image and symbol of love, ascend closer to paradise before being able to pass from the earthly Jerusalem to the celestial Jerusalem. The most important person Virgil and Dante meet in their pilgrimage up Mount Purgatory is the poet Statius. Statius was the author of the epic poem The Thebaid, the second greatest Latin epic poem only after Virgil's Aeneid, at least of course to Dante, and what was also considered to be true in the Renaissance era of Italy. Virgil was read by everyone, but so too was Statius. Statius even serves many purposes within the poem. He is the heir of Virgil, and he was, according to Dante and early Christian tradition, a secret convert to Christianity. As such, not only is he the heir to Virgil, poetically and historically, Statius lived after Virgil had died, he is the heir to Virgil as the poet instructor of love to Dante as they reach the top of Mount Purgatory. In that ascent, the poets all converse with one another about the nature of love, about the only thing that truly matters in life, love. Statius is, therefore, the bridge connecting pagan Rome, Virgilian Rome, to Christian Rome. Thus, Virgil enters Purgatory incapable of being the bridge to take Dante to heaven. And so Statius is necessary, because Statius represents the supersession of Virgil into the baptizing waters of Christianity. Dante pays the great poet his homage by including him in the moving entourage of love poets, now numbering symbolically 3, as they progress ever closer to the celestial realm of love, which they had all written about in their various ways. The 3 poets of love in Purgatorio are burning and sojourning hearts of love, who also engage in face-to-face conversations with one another. Again, sacramentally, this relationship, this friendship, is prefiguring and embodying the Trinity, the triune reality of love. Thus, just as the Trinity is the reality of love, this human instantiation of the Trinity, the love of Virgil, Statius, and Dante, must be 3. Again, Dante is using the symbols of numbers to communicate something to his readers. They are then the poetic manifestation of the Trinity, for they are in a loving union, a loving relationship with each other, and engaged in acts of speech with one another. They are speaking on the nature of poetry. They are discussing the meaning of poetry. They are discussing how love poetry brings us and directs us, how it brings the heart and the soul and directs the heart and the soul to heaven. Statius becomes the poet who symbolizes the passing of the torch of love poetry to Dante, just as he took up the torch from Virgil. And now, with Virgil and Statius having traveled with Dante, and Virgil having returned to limbo, the great flame passes to the immortal Florentine as they prepare to enter the realm of the White Rose. Dante's inclusion of Statius in the pilgrimage is theological and poetic. As mentioned, there are 3 poets journeying together up the mountain to enter the realm of the Trinity. Virgil may be relieved by Beatrice at the top of Mount Purgatory, thus keeping the pilgrim group at 3, but the number 3 becomes a central guiding symbol in Purgatorio. Additionally, That all three are poets and all three are Romans allows Dante to communicate the power and the directionality of poetry. In their conversations, in their relationship, Dante, by including Statius with Virgil and himself, is telling us something rather profound. And mind you, Dante, at least momentarily, as they're journeying up Mount Purgatory, includes many other poets, some famous and others largely lost to history, kind of like Statius. And this is equally essential to the movement of the Divine Comedy. If Dante's epic is the story of the drama of salvation, the greatest drama and story ever told, it is also a story of the history of love poetry, from Hesiod and Homer, whom we met in Limbo, through Virgil and Statius, up to a number of the medieval and the Renaissance poets, the troubadours and the Italian poets. Here let from the dead poetry rise up, O sacred muses, since I am yours. By having Statius as part of the entourage, part of the trio of love poets, Dante is suggesting to us that poetry, speaking the reality of love, speaks a philosophical truth. It speaks a theological truth, and it speaks the truth of human nature. Dante is bringing himself into the realm of the apostles, the poetic apostles of love and truth. Dante opened Purgatorio by brilliantly prefiguring what the journey up Mount Purgatory reveals, just as he had done in the opening lines of the Inferno, where he cried out to the muses for help. O muses, O high genius, help me now. He is also informing his reader that poetry can lead to conversation and turn the human gaze up to the heavenly realms, to heavenly things. In fact, without poetry, without love, we cannot ascend. That is the fundamental message of Purgatorio, just as it was in the Inferno. Paradise, then, is the land to which all poetry directs the human heart and the mind and the soul, and in another sense, is the land of poetic abundance, where poetic love, poetry itself, never ceases. The journey up Mount Purgatory to the realm of heaven is the poetic story of Virgil. It is the poetic story of Statius. It is the poetic story that Dante is telling us. It is fitting that Dante's epic of love has the poets and the theologians of love, who are poets in their own right, guiding him into the land of the white rose, the very flower of love. Where the poets directed Dante to the celestial sphere, again represented by Virgil and Statius in Purgatorio, talking about the nature of poetry. And as they talk as friends concerning the nature of love in poetry, they journey every bit closer to heaven. And so it is that Beatrice now appears, who will teach Dante to always love God. And then we also meet the great mystic theologian, Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, who explains to Dante the love of God, which guides Dante through the heavenly spheres of love itself. Love literally carried Dante through hell, love in the form, the incarnate form of the poet Virgil. Love called Dante up Mount Purgatory through the love poetry, the conversations of Virgil, Statius, and Dante. Again, their relationship being a symbolic human instantiation of the Trinity. And now love is going to instruct Dante in the cardinal and theological virtues. Having ordered his love and guided by poetry, learning the great virtue of friendship with the inclusion of Statius, Dante is ready to enter the realm of the white rose. Love has triumphed. The epic of love, sung of by Virgil and Statius and all the other great poets, has directed the heart and the soul to heaven. The stars are once more the luminaries of beauty that capture Dante's eye, while also reminding us of new growth, of new life. From those holiest waters I return, to her reborn, a tree renewed, in bloom, with newborn foliage, immaculate, eager to rise, now ready for the stars. Beatrice doesn't appear to Dante until the 30th canto of Purgatorio. She is introduced as the embodiment of faith, hope, and love, the three theological virtues according to Christianity. Covering all the chariot, Dante says, appeared a lady, over her white veil and olive crown, and under her green cloak, her gown, the color of eternal flame. The colors that adorn Beatrice's splendid gown each represent one of the virtues, white being faith, green being hope, and red, the eternal flame, being the symbolic color of love. That Beatrice is dressed, as she is, in the colors of the theological virtues gives a prefiguration of the transfigured glory of heaven and all the souls therein. Dante, as we know, had fallen madly in love with Beatrice during his earthly life. Her death, in part, caused Dante's downfall into darkness. It was a love that was unconsummated, an unrequited love that Dante never got to fulfill. Now, however, her beauty is so majestic that it whets his appetite for more. But more incredibly, her beauty, the whetting of that appetite, directs him to the proper ordering of nature as established by God, and of course with the help of Beatrice, who reminds Dante to always keep his mind and his eyes on God. The arrival of Beatrice not only represents the final supersession of pagan Rome, represented by Virgil, she also bears the three virtues, which reminds us again of the Trinity, appropriate given that Dante is about to enter the abundant abode of the Trinity. Her radiance is now that which will guide Dante into the realm of love itself, and her guidance is that of teacher and comforter, like the great teacher and comforter who walked the sands and sea of Galilee. Beatrice has become a literal vessel of light in the darkness. She brings illumination to the world ruined in darkness. As Beatrice begins to guide Dante through the spheres of heaven, she reminds him, direct your mind in gratitude to God, who raised us up to his first star. Like Christ, Beatrice's role here is to remind us of God above all things. Like Christ, she leads the way. She leads the way forward for our pilgrim to be directed to all the things good, true, and beautiful. She has become Dante's teacher about the truths of the cosmos of life and salvation. And this is very important because Virgil and Statius taught Dante the truths of the human heart and the human soul. For that is what poetry has the power to do. Now theology emerges, for poetry directs us to the truths of theology, and theology is concerned with the nature of the cosmos, the nature of life, the very nature of salvation itself. Among all things, however disparate, there reigns an order, Beatrice says, and this gives the form that makes the universe resemble God. Therein God's higher creatures see the imprint of eternal excellence, that goal for which the system is created. And in all this order, all created things, according to their bent, maintain their place, disposed in proper distance from their source. Therefore they move all to a different port, across the vast ocean of being, and each endowed with its own instinct as guide. This is what carries fire toward the moon, this moving force of mortal heart. This is what binds the earth and makes it one. Love, according to Beatrice, is the law of life, the law of the cosmos, and the law that makes all things whole. Christian theology teaches that love is what orders our lives to everything. Love is the meaning for existence. Love is the reality that guides the cosmos. Love transcends space and time itself. Love is the nature of everything. Everything has within it the instinct of love. It is endowed with love to be part of the grand waltz of love. And mind you, this is what Dante was hinting at all along with his relationship with the poets. Love is what orders our lives to bring about the happiness that we seek. As Beatrice later tells Dante, as they near the central sphere of heaven, on that point depends all nature and all the heavens. Observe the circle nearest it, and know the reason for its spinning at such speed is that love's fire burns into it motion. Without love, disintegration. Without love, ruin. Without love, darkness, death, and destruction. But with love, everything is brought into being. With love, everything is brought into light. With love, everything is given new life. Again, read what Beatrice tells Dante here. On that point depend all nature and all the heavens. Observe the circle nearest it, and know the reason for its spinning at such speed is that love's fire burns it into motion. Love governs all things. As Dante grows with Beatrice in his understanding of love, the divine love that unaided human reason cannot know, the formerly overburdening beauty which shamed Virgil and Dante, is now transformed into a blessed and joyful smile that brings only happiness whenever Dante looks upon her face. Instead of fear, instead of shame, instead of trembling, Dante is now enraptured by her beauty and her wisdom. Moreover, after meeting the wise men of the fourth sphere of heaven, including King Solomon, St. Albertus Magnus, and St. Thomas Aquinas, Beatrice reminds Dante to still give thanks to God. Then Beatrice said, "And now give thanks to the Son of angels, by whose grace you have ascended to this sun of sense." Dante tells us, no mortal heart was ever more disposed to do devotion and to yield itself to God so fully and readily as he at that moment. Beatrice's words are efficacious to the pilgrim, just as Christ's words are efficacious to those who hear and obey. In paradise, Beatrice is a sort of high priest, conductor, and prophetess to the pilgrim Dante. She reveals to him the intricacies of the cosmos, reveals all of its secrets to him. She reveals to him how the divine love of heaven, that true love of God, is self-giving and freely receptive, and that all other types of love fall short in comparison to this free-giving and freely receptive love that binds together the Trinity and the whole of the cosmos. It is the self-giving and self-receiving love of the Trinity which flows forth to create and order all things in and to love. It is the reality of love that Beatrice is teaching Dante. Like Mass, heaven is a place of constant worship, music, and harmony, brought forth by love. Songs break out in perfect melody here in heaven. Prayers are headed by many congregants, all present in the cathedral that is in heaven. For example, after meeting the Emperor Justinian, Justinian ends his discourse with joyful prayer. Hosanna, Holy God of hosts, you illuminate with your brightness the blessed flame of these realms. This prayer by Justinian is apt because, as Dante proceeds through the additional spheres of heaven, paradise grows brighter and more beautiful as he journeys closer and closer to the Trinity itself. And it also is a reflection of humility. Justinian, the great Roman emperor, humbled so far from God, yet happy that he is in heaven. And that is something very important that Dante is communicating to us. It doesn't matter how great or how small a life and a soul was on earth. In heaven, all are joyful, all are happy, all are a reflection of the love of God. Through the course of the poem, God uses Beatrice to reach out to Dante to bring back this wayward son. So Dante here is sort of like the prodigal son, being called back to the Father's house. Like the Old Testament prophets, whom God used to reach out to his wayward sons and daughters prior to the coming of Christ, Beatrice is the instantiated person from whom God's wisdom and grace flows to those who need it, namely Dante. And like the Old Testament prophets, whom Christ spoke through according to Catholic theology, divine wisdom, God, also speaks through Beatrice. Beatrice was everything to Dante. This produced the double-edged sword that led Dante wayward after her death. Dante loved Beatrice to the point of forgetting God. Beatrice's arrival begins with a rebuke. She accosts Dante for having strayed after her death. Yet God knew the love that Dante had for Beatrice, so he sent Beatrice to resurrect him. In this way, Beatrice is acting in prefiguration that which Christ does, resurrect us from death and usher us into the gates of paradise, which is precisely what Beatrice does for Dante. Beatrice is simultaneously Dante's downfall and his salvation. Beatrice is reminiscent of the prefigured Christ of the prophets. And the prophets were also a double-edged sword that caused carnal Israel so much trouble during their existence. The prophets accost the people for forgetting God. The people, in turn, begin to idolize some of the prophets instead of God, or in the case of Jeremiah, loathe the prophet altogether and attempt to kill him. The prophets are sent by God to resurrect God's people. The prophets were at once the downfall and the salvation of Old Testament Israel. Dante knows all of this, and so Dante grants to Beatrice this most important theological reality. She is the in persona Christi in the Divine Comedy. She, in a Catholic theological sense, she is the embodiment of Christ speaking to Dante in order to bring Dante into heaven. In her final words of instruction to the pilgrim poet, she reminds Dante of the coming judgment and resurrection, just as the prophet Isaiah had done to the Israelites long ago. She says to him, "The greater goodness makes for greater bliss. A greater bliss calls for a greater body. If it is perfect in all its parts, therefore this sphere, which sweeps all of the world along with it, must correspond to this, the inner ring that loves and knows the most. And so here Beatrice brings together the very reality of nature that hell itself had denied. Knowledge and love, truth and love. That is what we must come to know in order to reach the starry lights of heaven. Not as this figment of the imagination, not as this world out beyond, but as the very real world that governs the cosmos, as the very real world that governs our entire life, the real nature of everything. God does not leave man, let alone his sons and daughters, without teaching and instruction from other humans. The Old Testament is filled with teaching and instruction. Christ's very ministry was grounded in teaching and instruction. Beatrice served as that agent of teaching and instruction to help perfect Dante's nature, the nature of love within him, with that supernatural grace and love needed to transfigure a broken and wounded man into a blossoming flower of new life. Thus, as Dante nears that heavenly bud to behold Christ and the Blessed Trinity, Beatrice now fades away to take her place among the chorus of angels and saints, to give loving praise to God. The tripartite journey to heaven is now complete. We realize at long last that Dante learned love in hell, ordered his love in purgatory, so as to now enjoy the eternal fruit of love in heaven. As the Trinity takes center stage in Dante's heart and his eyes, he takes his place in that eternal choir with all the blessed souls, angels and humans alike, to sing of the love that moves the sun and the other stars.